Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's topic inside our Women in the Wild Adventures with NatHab expedition leaders Judy Wilson and Jessica Morgan. Aha, thank you both so much for being here today, Judy and Jessica. Over to you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. So welcome everybody. We are super excited to be here with you today to talk about a program that is very near and dear to both of our hearts, our NatHab Women in the Wild Adventures. But first, we're just going to give you a little bit of background on each of us. So my name is Judy Wilson, and I'm coming to you today from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and that's where we start and end all of our Churchill trips here. I've been an expedition leader with NatHab since 2018, and I lead trips in Churchill in all three of our seasons there. So that would be the polar bear season that starts shortly, October, November, Northern Lights in January, February, and March, and beluga whales in July and August. And I also guided the trips that we had in Quebec, the whales and trails trips. And in 2020, I led my first Women in the Wild trip, but we will get into that history in a little bit. And I'm going to flip it over to Jess, a mere 3,000 kilometers away from me.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, super excited to be here presenting with you. Hello, everybody. My name is Jessica Morgan. I'm coming from Tucson, Arizona, pretty much the other side of the continent from Judy, but very happy to be doing this webinar with you. I've been guiding with Natural Habitat Adventures since 2021. And I primarily guide in the U.S. national parks, but have had the wonderful opportunity to get outside of the U.S. and guide in Mexico for the monarch migration, as well as the amazing opportunity to be up in Churchill and guide the polar bear trips. The last 3 summers I've spent in bear camp up in Alaska, and that's primarily where I've been doing my Women in the Wild trips. So again, very excited to be doing this webinar with you all. Great. So now that we have introduced ourselves, I would like to take a second and introduce Natural Habitat Adventures and our partnership with World Wildlife Fund. Our mission at Natural Habitat Adventures is conservation through exploration, right? So big picture, what that means obviously is protecting our planet as a whole. And we do that through things like supporting our local communities, right? And travel industry influence, right? Our goal is to set the standard for nature travel. We have been the exclusive partner of World Wildlife Fund, the travel partner, for over 21 years now, since 2003. And we, as a company, as well as U.S. travelers, have donated over $10 million. That is something that we are super proud of. We wear this panda with pride. And of course, NatHab has such a nice breadth of programs that we offer. We go to all 7 continents on the planet, ranging from our photo expeditions to private and family adventures, of course, our nature journeys, and now the Women in the Wild program. So what we're going to be covering today, Judy and I, we're going to start out with the history of Women in the Wild trips, what the goals are of these trips, why you might want to join one of these wonderful trips, our ethos or our philosophy behind Women in the Wild, who these wild women are, the impact that we see on these trips. We're going to have a nice little segment interview with Judy, and then we're going to round it out with some resources for you. All right, Judy, why don't you take it over for history of the Women in the Wild?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, the concept of running women-only adventures at NatHab really got rolling thanks to Annie Van Dinther. She's the director of our field team. Annie led the first Women in the Wild adventure in Churchill, Manitoba during Northern Lights season in 2020. I was thrilled to be asked to lead the second trip in Churchill right after Annie's. And I totally fell in love with the program right from the get-go. And since then, the uptake and the demand for these departures has been fantastic. Much of it thanks to our fabulous guests who have done one trip and then they say, hey, I want another one, and they sign up for a second trip. So if we just talk about a little bit about the background here. My first group in 2020 was a small but mighty group. 2 pictures of them there on the left-hand side up in Northern Lights in the dead of winter. And they're standing with one of our amazing presenters in Churchill, an incredible, strong, wise, resilient Indigenous elder who really touched the hearts of these gals by her words and her generous spirit. And since that trip, I've led a dozen Women in the Wild trips. We've seen rapid growth in the past 2 years, much of it due to the feedback by our guests indicating their desire for more women-only itineraries. And I suspect that some of my past guests are watching now, and I might be inundated with a few messages this afternoon. So hi, everybody. And this year, 2024, we now have 14 itineraries to choose from worldwide. And in any one season, there can be more than one Women in the Wild trip offered. So there's more than 14 actual departures. A good example is this coming Northern Lights season in Churchill. I have a whopping 5 Women in the Wild trips on the books that I will be leading. So I invite you to come hang out with me and experience all that we're talking about today. It would be a ton of fun to see some of you up there. Jess is going to cover this off later, and it is on our website. But besides the locations the two of us have talked about, to give you a sense of the depth and breadth of the Women in the Wild program, we are now offering these programs in many of the U.S. national parks, Costa Rica, Mexico with the monarchs, Portugal, East Greenland, and that's not the complete list. That's just to name a few. I personally have Kingdom of the Monarchs on my bucket list. I recently started growing milkweed in my garden to try help the monarchs here up in Canada. And I had my first monarch hatch about 3 weeks ago, and I just lost my mind. So I would love to see where they congregate in Mexico. I think that'd be super cool. So Jess, how about you? Which Women in the Wild trips on your bucket list?
Well, first of all, I highly encourage the Monarch trip. I think just naturally, it's a very touching and almost spiritual trip to see just how many butterflies are down there. But I think adding that Women in the Wild component of it would just add a whole nother level of magic. So yes, I agree with you on that. I think Costa Rica also would be really cool to see, not just the culture and the people, but the biodiversity. And as a photographer, being able to photograph all of the different animals and birds and sea turtles and whatnot would be amazing. And I think, again, doing that with a group of women would be really inspiring.
Cool.
Awesome. All right. So what are Women in the Wild trips? So NatHab's Women in the Wild trips are specialized adventures exclusively for women travelers, designed to be an empowering, accessible, connective experience through a female lens. And that's exactly what it is. It's female led and it's all women. And we really do want to emphasize this female lens. That is something that Judy and I, as well as any woman expedition leader with NatHab, will emphasize in their departure. So what that means is researching prior and being able to draw in current or past women scientists, researchers, artists, conservationists, Indigenous women, to be able to speak on what it's like to be in that area, to dedicate their lives to living there or researching it. And I think about that when I see this picture on the left of Ranger Diana, who is our backcountry ranger at Bear Camp. She lives there in Lake Clark National Park, which is one of the most remote national parks in the US. And fascinating fact, of the 8 backcountry rangers that work and live for 4 months off grid in Lake Clark National Park, 8 of them are women, which is amazing. And so we oftentimes like to invite her over for our Women in the Wild trips. And it's really cool to see that dynamic, right? We are learning from Diana, but Diana's also learning from the women. And I think there's a really beautiful back and forth energy to that. Great. So why Women in the Wild? We know that there is a growing demand for women in nature travel, as specifically women-only travel. Of course, our big picture goal is empowering women, right? And that goes back to our mission as a company, right? Our goal is to always empower our guests to feel like they can make a difference in this world. But along with that, building camaraderie and friendships that will last a lifetime, having these meaningful connections and shared experiences, as well as feeling safe and supportive. I know Judy and I talk about this all the time. Guests really truly feel like they have selected the right company because they feel supported. They know where their next meal is going to be. They know where they're going to be sleeping at night. They feel comfortable traveling in a group of other women. So that growing demand, I'm going to touch back on that for a second. A travel publisher, online Journeywoman, conducted a 2-year study that looked at 1,500 women from ages 55 to 75 throughout US, Canada, and Australia. And they found that 65% of women travelers are widowed, divorced, or single. 44 travel solo most of the time, and a whopping 74% are actual experienced solo travelers, and that could be decades long of experience. So again, there is this growing demand of women-only trips or women who would like to travel solo and be with other women. There is a growing interest. When we talk about this, the why is very individual for every woman, right? Why you go on these trips is very pertinent to you, and you might have your own goals and wants out of it. But these are kind of our big picture why we do what we do. And with that being said, we keep in the forefront that these are still natural habitat adventure itineraries. Conservation is our product, right? So again, at the forefront, it's interpretation of what we're looking at. It's learning about our environment and the cultures around us. But I think it's important to remember that having this all female dynamic just adds a whole nother layer of magic.
Yeah, and besides exploring nature in some beautiful remote locations, these women in the wild trips are also about discovery, community, and empowerment. And in terms of discovery, it isn't unique to these women in the wild trips to feel immersed in nature and to feel transformed. That can happen on all of our NatHab trips. We are pretty darn good at what we do. You get to unplug and be in the moment. However, what does seem different about these women in the wild trips is how much women learn about themselves. It seems hard to believe that in less than a week that guests can feel changed. Some of it may come from interactions with women in the local communities. Some of it comes from interactions between each other on the trip. And some of it is personal growth. It's really hard to define the organic change that happens for some women, but Jess and I see it, and it consistently happens. So let me tell you about some of the cool things that happen. It's no shocker that we have a lot of female energy on these trips, and that even relates to the wildlife. We see and discuss lots of maternal stuff with the wildlife. For example, in the Churchill River estuary, we see so many mama belugas with their calves. There's up to 3,000 or more belugas in that estuary, and a good chunk of those are mums and calves. I think one of the absolute coolest things about belugas, and there are a lot of cool things about them, is the matrilineal learning, where the older females, once they hit about 40, female belugas hit menopause. And it's unusual in the animal kingdom for animals that hit menopause to not be dying. And these females can live for decades longer than the 40 years. And they become the matriarchs. They become the teachers. They teach the young ones and everybody else how to find food, how to navigate ice, all of the things that our aunties and grandmothers teach us. And then in Churchill, we have the mama polar bears, who essentially have to fast for up to 8 months. From the time she comes off the ice in summer, hangs out in Churchill area, and then she walks to a den in Wapusk National Park in the fall. She gives birth, cranks out a ton of high-fat milk, and then walks to the ice with her little puffball cub or cubs in March. And she needs to be protecting her cubs constantly. It's incredible. So as women, we see females in the wild being strong and resilient, and I think that's a really powerful connection for us. Bottom line is we relate. Even the aurora is referred to as Lady Aurora. And different cultures all have their own stories about the aurora, and almost all of them have a feminine angle. It's a really powerful and spiritual thing to be standing there in the freezing cold under a pulsing aurora. In terms of some of the people we interact with, we had a situation in Churchill where we were driving down the main street, and the local female conservation officer, we saw her, we stopped, and she hopped on our bus and gave an impromptu talk about her job wrangling polar bears and what it's like to live in and work in Churchill. At Alaska Bear Camp, the female backcountry ranger that Jess was talking about, she comes and talks what it's like to live off the grid for 4 months. A good friend of mine in Churchill works for Parks Canada. She's been doing research in the north for over 20 years. And I asked her to come and talk to our group one time, and she arrived by snow machine to our remote cabin in the boreal forest and took us on an ecology walk in the dead of winter. There's a lot of stuff in that sentence there. These are real women and real stories. So that's the discovery angle. So if we look at community, bottom line is women understand community. It's about being comfortable, feeling safe in a brave space, and feeling like it's okay to be vulnerable and authentic. We tend to get a lot of singing and dancing on these trips, as seen as in the top left picture there, or the far left picture, sorry. And some women form lasting friendships and end up traveling together on future trips. I see that happening all the time. And invariably what happens in these groups stay in touch, sometimes for years. And I've been doing these for years, so I've seen that happen. And then they end up showing up on another one of my trips together. So that's pretty darn cool. Let's switch to empowerment now. And empowerment is almost easier to explain with some examples, I think, because it's different for everybody. The very first Women in the Wild trip that I led, we had a gal on that trip who was a little bit nervous about the cold and traveling alone for good reason. But by the end of the trip, she was teaching everyone how to start a fire with a flint. She was laughing and singing along to the music, dancing, and saying how proud she was of herself for having gone snowshoeing in a blizzard. So, and in Northern Light season, as that picture on the left there, we use these quite sharp machetes to build a nookshucks together, and we have to cut these really heavy snow blocks, really dense snow, and we work together to build them. And it's fun to see everyone. We've got a gal showing us how to do it, and then everyone pitches in, and it's just that teamwork thing that happens, and it's a real sense of accomplishment. And add to this that most of these women have never worn heavy snow boots, and I'm talking heavy. Parkas that are super warm and with the big hoods, the snow pants, the hats, and the mitts. And they've never experienced 40 below weather. And FYI, it doesn't really matter if it's Fahrenheit or Celsius at that level. It's cold. And then we've got in the middle there, we've got, let's do some yoga with a brown bear walking along the fence line in Alaska. Like, that's pretty crazy. Who would have ever thought they'd be doing that? And then on the right in Churchill, we have an old naval base. And that naval base used to have a bunch of women in a high security area working hard at the back there, and they were cracking code during the Cold War. So that was a long time ago. And, fast forward a number of years ago, a super cool young artist from Australia, a woman, painted this a mural the length of this building, but the mural is not quite what you're seeing there. The full mural says, "No, I'm here," as a message to the world about climate change. But we kind of, on the women's trips, we improvise a little bit with the wording, so that's kind of fun. But I do see it time and time again. Women are doing things they never thought they could or would, and learning about other women who have also done amazing things. So, who joins our trips? We've alluded a little bit to this, and there'll probably be a few more mentions about it, but who comes on these trips? Women of diverse backgrounds, different cultures, different stages and ages of life. And what's really neat is we get women with much or little lived experience, and that combination of putting women together of all of these backgrounds and everything is really cool. We also get single travelers, we get partners traveling together, we get mums and daughters, sisters, friends, cousins, and some of our solo travelers may be recently widowed, or their partner may not be able to travel, or they may just be hesitant to travel on their own. And we also will get photographers coming on the trips, which is really fun. Essentially, it's people who love to travel and people who want to meet new people. The consistent thing, though, is that our guests know that NatHab will take care of them with a predictable level of care and attention. And it doesn't matter what trip you're on, that is a known fact. So the bottom line is women traveling solo or with another woman has become a large demographic for us. And it shows in the number of women in the wild trips that we're running and the uptake we're getting on these trips. Okay, here's a cool one. What's the impact of these trips? This is the part that really gets me is how impactful these trips are for our guests. At our welcome dinner, when we meet each other for the very first time, this kind of ragtag group of gals, it's incredible to witness what happens. I have had women cry as they introduce themselves because this trip represents so much to them, and it can be just in various ways to each person, totally dependent on each individual. So we always ask at the beginning at the welcome dinner, so why this trip? When they're introducing themselves, why this trip? And most of the answers relate to sort of the predictable things like wanting to see the wildlife and the landscape, sort of flora and fauna related. And at the end of the trip, when we sit down at our last meal and we ask, what are the favorite moments of the trip? What are your takeaways from the trip? And it's so crazy because it's often about the impact this trip has had on them in such a deep and profound way. Sometimes things like seeing the wildlife or the aurora or whatever is not the number one thing that they're taking away. So we see women gaining confidence, becoming stronger, finding their voice, sharing intimate details about themselves, bonding, finding pure joy and belly laughing. And apparently, being in the moment of pure joy and belly laughing is an art that apparently we've lost a little bit as we're getting older. Jess, how about you? What are some of the things that you see happening?
Yeah, totally. That was beautifully said, Judy. I'm going to echo everything you said. That impact is palpable when you're on a trip. And like you said, it's either seeing it at the welcome dinner right off the bat, or maybe it's walking out of bear camp and saying goodbye to these women on the bush plains, and there's tears on both ends. You can feel that this was a special trip. And typically, my most memorable trips that I lead are the women in the wild trips. They're the ones that I remember the most, the ones that I feel like I can be myself the most a little bit, be more vulnerable, be more open. And like you said earlier, having those email chains years later, or group chats or Facebook groups, whatever it is, where these women are staying in touch. And not only that, but maybe they're traveling together again in the future, like you'd mentioned. That is the impact that we see firsthand as their guides, which is really special. And with that, we would like to share a few reviews from travelers themselves because we think these hold a lot of weight. We take our evaluations very seriously. So we're going to start off with the first one here. So more women's only trips. I'm so serious. The bond, the fluidity, the emotional journey you are free to go through. My daughter and I traveled together, loved the women's trips, sisters, mother-daughter teams, friends, solo travel, a terrific group. Being part of an all-women's group was terrific. It was a safe space where women could let loose, share their feelings, and test themselves by being independent. I think that there is a very big market for women-only groups of travelers. Some women feel more free to be themselves in a women-only environment. And as noted before, I've traveled many times with small groups, primarily women only. Without a doubt, this was one of the very best. And I took a second, Judy and I did, to highlight and bold some of the words that we thought stood out the most, right? So bond, emotional journey, let loose, safe space, and free. The ones that stuck out to both of us the most. And again, I think these reviews hold so much weight. This is physical evidence of what we're doing is making an impact. All right, we're gonna shift gears over to Judy, who has led a dozen of these Women in the Wild trips. And Judy, if you don't mind, I am going to throw you in the hot seat and grill you a little bit, if that's okay. Okay, awesome. All right. So the first question of all
Sorry,
of the, are you good? Should we continue?
I'm good. I
Okay,
obviously haven't seen that.
I know that was a little surprise for you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Of all of the Women in the Wild trips that you've led, what moments stand out to you the most?
Oh, wow. Okay, I have to take a breath. That was hilarious. Um, okay, what moments stand out? Oh, I've got a few for you. Um, okay, on that slide there on the bottom right, we have one of our fabulous presenters. That's Sandy Cook. She's an Indigenous artist and presenter. Um, she does so much for us. We just love her. And she does everything from we do maybe an art project one time, and other times she'll do a talk indoors. Other times we'll go for a walk outdoors, and she'll show us some of the artwork that she's done outdoors. Any of you that have been on these trips will remember Sandy very well. And one of the talks that she was doing, she was talking about a current project of the 7 sacred teachings that she was doing a picture for all of the different teachings, and one of the paintings included Raven. And in the 7 sacred teaching, Raven teaches us to be honest with ourselves and to walk an honest path. And I noticed that one of my guests was quite emotional. It's not uncommon for guests to get emotional during some of the presentations, but she was visibly quite emotional. And at the end of Sandy's talk, which was fabulous, she went up to her and there was a lot of hugging going on with both of them. And by the time we left, both Sandy and my guest were crying. And what was happening was that Raven was very important to this guest of mine, and she'd recently lost her husband, and she or her husband they identified with Raven. So what happens? Sandy goes home, pulls out one of her Raven prints, and tracks us down in Churchill. Now, Churchill's not that big of a place. It wasn't that hard to figure out which restaurant we were in. So she busts into our pizza party, and she gifted this gal her Raven print because she was so touched by how touched my guest was. That's the kind of moment that I mean, you can't script this stuff. Like it was fantastic. And our trip and Sandy's action allowed this gal to move forward from losing her husband. Okay, so that I love that story. You also might wonder why there's pictures of Cheese Whiz on the slide there. Okay, so this past Northern Lights season, one of my gals inadvertently tucked a packet of Cheese Whiz in her pocket. It's those little individual packets like peanut butter and stuff. And the restaurant had little Cheese Whiz things. I actually don't know why she would have put it in her pocket, but she did. That night we saw an incredible aurora. And so she decided that it was the Cheese Whiz was the good luck charm. So the next morning at breakfast, all the Cheese Whiz disappeared out of the little holders on the table, and the server's going, I can't figure this out. We're out of Cheese Whiz. So she refills them. And basically by the end of the week, there was no Cheese Whiz left in Churchill. But yeah, so we kept seeing Northern Lights, and everyone kept saying it's the Cheese Whiz. So that was fun. And then I'm texting back to our operations folks back in Winnipeg saying, you guys are going to have to check the pockets really carefully of our jackets because there's going to be Cheese Whiz, and you can't send that to dry cleaning with Cheese Whiz in there. And they're going, what are you talking about? Anyway, it's a Judy thing, I guess. And then at the Churchill airport, when we were done our trip, we go to the airport and we're waiting for the plane to arrive with the next group of NatHab guests, and we do a swap at the airport. I was mortified. I look over and here's all of my gals with little packets of Cheese Whiz in their hand, and they're going up to random NatHab guests who are just arriving saying, this is, don't tell anyone, this is the special charm for the aurora. And I'm just kind of going, oh my gosh, what's happening? But anyway, that happened. So apparently the Cheese Whiz kept getting passed on from trip to trip to trip throughout the whole season. So this joke still has legs, and it's 6 months later, and I still get messages and pictures. That picture of Cheese Whiz came from one of my guests, and I can't even read what it says on there, but something about may the whiz be with you or something. But yeah. Another quick story is in beluga season, which just ended back in August. Every time I just go to a happy place, and that's super hot day. The sun is setting. We're all of us gals are down at the beach. We've got our shoes and socks off, pants rolled up. We're standing in the water and we're skipping stones across this perfectly calm Hudson Bay at sunset. And I found out like a whole bunch of the guests had never skipped stones, which I happened to be a champion stone skipper, so I taught everyone how to do it, and it was just such a good feeling, like childlike almost. That same trip, like the day before, we were out kayaking on the Churchill River again at sunset, actually it was golden hour. And one of my guests said, hey, Judy, we're all kind of floating here together in our kayaks. Why don't you play something from your playlist? So my phone was hanging from a lanyard around my neck, so it was kind of hanging into the kayak. So I just sort of put it on, and Hey Soul Sister was the song that came on. And it was reverberating through the water. And as soon as it started playing, there was a massive pod of male belugas. They did an about turn and they came just blasting towards us. Well, actually me in particular. And there was this big weight coming off all of their heads as they barreled through the river towards us. And at the very last minute, they dove. And I got actually a bit of the dive on my GoPro. My heart was pounding. All of us were screaming, in a good way. But yeah, I won't soon forget that experience. So sorry, that was a bit of a long answer to your question.
No, Judy, that was amazing. I love that. I love hearing those stories. They're touching, they're hilarious, they're kind of goofy, but I mean, yeah, you have a lot of fun on your trips, and it shows.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Why do you think our guests select women in the wild trips?
I think for many women, this could be the first trip they're doing without their spouse or partner, who may no longer be with them or is unable to accompany them. I'm constantly surprised by how many women are still caregivers. Many of us are caregivers for much of our lives, whether it's kids or adult like parents or partners. So that's pretty shocking to me. Like they may need respite care at home for their loved one. I have had guests tell me it's the first break they've had in a very long time. So I take this really seriously, and I know you do too, Jess, that when, if we can inject some fun and laughter and stuff, it's great. Um, I also think that women traveling with their own spouse or partner, they tell us that they feel comfortable on our trips. They feel safe, and they also feel free to be who they are. And it's fun. It's fun watching them. And if you're a single traveler, sometimes it might be a little less intimidating than a trip of mostly couples. And as we were talking about earlier, many women now travel alone and have for years, and it's this growing demographic. So that's why we've got so many trips going. And NatHab is, I think we're both very proud to say NatHab is an established conservation travel company that has an awesome reputation, and sets the bar extremely high in the industry.
Beautiful. Yep. Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judy. Is there anything different about the structure or itinerary for these trips?
The itinerary is the same as our other nature journey trips. We do the same scheduled activities, but where possible, we do have local women as our presenters. Doesn't always work in every jurisdiction, but we try. And I should note that many of these presenters already present for us on our regular trips. We do have a lot of women presenters already. And sometimes we even have bus drivers who are women, or our big rover drivers are women. And some of our operations people that may be with us might be women as well. And we partner with some amazing Indigenous elders, park rangers, conservation officers, researchers, artists, just cool local individuals with great stories. And also, as expedition leaders, we will incorporate stories of iconic women who have really impacted the history of the area that we're in.
For sure. Yep. Great. Thank you. And lastly, what do you hope your guests take away from a Women in the Wild trip, Judy?
Well, I love to see them gaining confidence in an environment that they feel is non-judgmental and safe to express themselves. We might have been known to dance to my famous playlist and maybe sing a little bit, singing and dancing like nobody's watching and listening. Um, we hear conversations happening, and they're really deep, meaningful, heartfelt conversations that happen on these trips amidst all of the fun. And many times these conversations happen after I've said goodnight and left for the evening. So this is not me instigating any of this, or you, Jess. This is what happens. This is just the magic that happens on these trips. And we see women allowing themselves to be vulnerable by sharing, crying, belly laughing, dancing, helping each other learn new skills. And we just see bonds developing that last beyond the trip itself. So you can't ask for much more than that.
Yeah, perfect. That's great, Judy. With Judy's permission, I am honored to share this poem that one of her guests had written. And you had mentioned that this guest had said that she's better with words than she is with a camera. And I think this is I don't know what her photographic skills are, but this is a testament because this is beautiful. So, wow, she emerges playfully unpredictable, emanating power, spirit, and knowing, bringing beauty, pulsing with connection and joy. Aurora, is that you? Hell no, I'm one of Judy's women of the wild. Wow. I think it again, this is a testament to our expedition leaders. This is a testament to you, Judy, and what you do bring to the table and your own skills, and you do bring it out of people. I've worked with you enough to see that. And I think for any NatHab trip, any expedition leader that you work with is going to bring their own style and pizzazz and fun to a trip. But I just love this poem, and I'm really happy to share it.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to switch a little bit here and provide some resources that you can check out to further your knowledge of our Women in the Wild program. So of course, nathab.com, the website there, you will find the top bar under Trip Finder. You can scroll down and there is an actual section there for the Women in the Wild page. And that's where you can find the plethora of itineraries that we offer, as Judy had mentioned, right? So whether it's wine and kayaking in Portugal, or the Kingdom of the Monarchs, Costa Rica, Northern Lights, which you are going to be leading quite a few this upcoming winter, there's something for everybody. There's such a diverse set of itineraries and things to see in this world. So please feel free to check that out. Also, we have a wonderful blog under our Good Nature blog, and that is dedicated to the women in the wild. So if you go to nathab.com/blog, you will find the drop-down menu, go to Women in the Wild, and there's some really, really great articles in there written by some fantastic women, office staff, guests, and the like. So take a second to check that out. And what we're going to do is have our wonderful moderator, Brooke, go ahead and play our Women in the Wild YouTube video. It's a short video, but we think it's a really wonderful way to round out this webinar. So.
In the wild is for women to go and be in a supportive thing, and it's by a female mission leader, and try to females whenever possible. And historically, when they're traveling and just in life, they're dealing with a million things that are on their to-do list. They're thinking about, okay, did I pack everything that I needed to pack for everyone that's traveling with me? Do they all have what they need? It's this mental to-do list that they're always carrying with them. And in this Women in the Wild program, they don't have to think about what anyone else needs. They are there to enjoy something fully for themselves, and there is someone that's actually going to take care of them. And that is such a special thing, and it honestly, you walk into the room and it just feels like something is lifted off of you. I went on my first Women in the Wild Northern Lights trip, and that is up in Churchill, Canada. I joined a nominal group of women and our guide 5 seconds into the welcome dinner. The vibe and connection was immediate. Just being with a group of women, you feel substantially more comfortable to step outside of your comfort zone and try something that is a little bit harder and a little bit scarier. It was a ton of childhood joy and laughter. These women were cracking jokes left, right, and center. It's about being together and being in wilderness in this really supportive community and space. I'm so happy to see how much they're getting out of this experience. The guests are losing their mind because they weren't expecting to have that kind of connection. I wasn't expecting to have that kind of connection. Our guide wasn't expecting to have that kind of connection. It's so powerful. We had women crying like 2 minutes into the welcome dinner. Yeah. You know that when they're out there together experiencing nature in this way, what they're gonna do is they're gonna take that and tell people that we need to protect these places. That is another huge ripple effect that comes from this, is you have women who, when they're in this space together, they want to engage in these kinds of conversations. They want to say, what else can we do for this community? They want to say, what else can we do to protect this natural environment? What else can we do to make a difference? it has a huge impact.
Wow. Okay, well, we're just waiting for that oh, there we go, to flip between the two of us here. Um, so Renata, that was my trip that Renata was on, and it was just fantastic to have her on the trip. I feel pretty proud that it was my trip that brought a tear to Renata's eye. And I might add that in terms of videos about Renata that she's in, I might have one of her uh, getting onto the bus at the end of an evening where we had fantastic aurora, and she might have been dancing to some tunes as she got onto the bus. So that's
Great.
just a very powerful video, isn't it, Jess?
Yeah, it is. It gets me choked up every time I see it. NatHub Films does a great job. Renata put that so well. So yes, it is wonderful.
Yeah.
You all can see my screen now, right?
Yep.
Can you see the screen? Okay, great. All right, and with that, we would like to thank you on behalf of Judy and I, as well as Natural Habitat Adventures and World Wildlife Fund. Thank you so much for sitting in on this webinar. Learning more about a program, as Judy mentioned, is very near and dear to our hearts, and we take very seriously. So thank you again, and hopefully we will see you on a future trip. Brooke?
Well, Judy, Jess, thank you. That was incredible. I want to join you so badly in the field now. It's not even funny. And I am positive that I hope that most of you listening feel the same way. Everybody, we have about 5-10 minutes open for Q&A, and we have a very quiet group of viewers. So please, everybody in your control panel there, please feel free to submit any questions. You have two top leading guides here that love these trips and know them inside and out. So now is the time to ask any questions that are on your mind about our Women in the Wild adventures. So while you're thinking of the questions you'd like to submit, I personally am curious, Judy and Jess, how did you get into guiding? And maybe Judy, I'll start with you.
Oh, well, that'll burn up the rest of the time. Oh, I've got a really eclectic background. I've got a strong science background. I've got a conservation background. It seems to run deep in my family. And I've also got a business background, and I am on the board at the Churchill Northern Studies Center, and a couple of our NatHab guides sort of found me and said, hey, you should come guide with us. And the rest is history. And it's a culmination. Really, what this does is it just allows me to pull all the tools out of my toolbox, I think. And it just feels like I'm absolutely in the right place, doing what I love. And I'm just sitting here looking at myself and the thing, and I've just got this big grin on my face the whole time. So it's obviously the right career path. How about you, Jess?
Yeah, that's awesome, Judy. My path is kind of diverse too. So I went to school to go into social work, and I worked in a nonprofit behavioral health agency right after graduating. And so I was a case manager for, goodness, about 3 or 4 years then. And I was always talking to my clients about, you got to do stuff that makes you happy. You got to find what you enjoy in life. And I realized I was not exactly taking my own advice. And so eventually I ended up doing quite a career change. I did a 180. I ended up getting a job at the visitor center at Saguaro National Park here in Tucson. And so I worked there for about 5 years. And I got really into photography during that time. I would go out in the morning and during my lunch break, and I'd stay late. And I started photographing kind of, year round, different times a day. And I ended up submitting work to Arizona Highways magazine, which I had grown up with, thought it was this fantastic, photography magazine. And so I got hooked up with them, and through some networking, I ended up working in Yellowstone as a photo guide in the summer. So I was based out of Old Faithful. I drove the historic yellow buses, which was really fun. My coworkers convinced me, a desert girl, to drive snow coaches in the winter. out of the north entrance, which I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't drive in snow. I don't even know what, icy conditions look like, let alone living in Yellowstone in the winter. And so anyways, I drove snow coaches for a season there, put a lot of hair on my chest, not literally, but it got me very confident in my not only driving skills, but again, we're talking about women in these spaces that you don't normally see, but as a guide as well. So anyways, the pandemic hit. I was no longer guiding in Yellowstone and had gotten hooked up with Natural Habitat Adventures, which I had actually done a trip back in 2017 with my parents to Churchill. And that's what planted the seed where I was like, you know what, guiding is something that I never thought I would be doing, but it's really cool, and this passion that I've kind of built over the years. So mine's a little convoluted as well, but that's my story.
Thank you both so much for sharing that. I just find that when we hear each other's stories and why we got into this, it's just so inspirational because none of our stories are exactly the same, and yet we happen to be all today on this call. So we have had a few questions come in that time. So first, when we're talking about the Churchill Beluga trips, how much time do we spend in kayaks?
That's a good question. We go out on one kayaking adventure, so it's, sort of 2.5 hours out on the river. And it is funny because usually by the time the time is up, people have sort of started to slowly make their way back to shore. But it's a fabulous experience. I am a pretty avid kayaker. I used to teach kayaking, and it is like no other experience. You get the belugas, this isn't the question, but you get the belugas coming right up to your boat, and sometimes they give you a little bump. Sometimes they'll blow what we call a little bit of beluga snot on you, and turn their neck and look at you, and it's amazing.
Perfect. Next we have here, could you elaborate how single travelers and how that works? So if somebody is traveling by themselves, do they stay in their own rooms or are they forced to share with someone else? Is it possible to have single accommodations if desired?
Yeah, I can take this one, Judy. Yep, absolutely. You have the ability in almost any location to either do a single supplement or have a roommate if you'd like to be matched with one. But it's totally it's up to you. I would work with your adventure specialist when you talk with the office and see what the options are, and then of course you can make that decision on your own. But yeah, yep, there are options if you would like to be on your own and have your own room in your own space. Totally.
Yes, and everybody on the call, if you are booked, definitely reach out to your adventure concierge who will be more than happy to help you prepare for whichever trip you are booked on. And then for anybody who's interested, our amazing adventure specialist team would be more than happy to talk you through everything imaginable to get you on the correct trip. Well, wonderful. So it looks like those are all of the questions that have come in. So Judy and Jess, I would love to turn it over to you for any last closing comments.
I can go first, Jess, if you want.
Yeah, sounds good.
And I'm sort of laughing here because I think I'm not surprised that there's not a lot of questions because women understand when you say women only trips, they get it. They get it. So I think that's sort of interesting. But Jess and I had a ton of fun putting this webinar together. I also had a ton of fun going through all my pictures since 2020 of all my women in the wild trips, and just like the smile just glued to my face. Such good memories. Both Jess and I were saying that as we went through our pictures, how much fun it was to relive things, and we've just had a really fun time. So, just very honored to be able to lead these trips. I'm in love with the program, and Jess and I super fun. So, thanks everyone. Hope to see you on a trip. Come see me on one of those 5 Northern Lights trips, please.
I love it. Thank you, Judy, for being an amazing partner on this webinar. And thank you all for chiming in today. I'm just going to say exactly what Judy said. So I appreciate you all taking an interest in this program that we love.
Again, Judy and Jess, thank you so much for sitting down with me, sitting down with everybody today. That was a fantastic presentation. And man, you have me so wanting to get in the field with both of you. Hopefully one day that will happen. And also, I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and I will make sure I get that out to all of you here very soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.